Welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about these two. These two don't want to play nice together, and it's called CPU bottlenecking, and let's talk about it. So, recently just got a RX 5600 XT into the garage, decided to do some testing, and I did a separate video on that, on testing this card, my reviews and my opinions on that, so definitely check that video out. But one of the issues that I was running into in testing this graphics card was that it was being held back, and what it was holding it back was actually my test bench CPU. So for my test bench CPU, I don't know if that comes in there, I have an Intel Core i3-7100. I've had this thing probably in here for about a year. It has served me well in testing GT 1030s, 1050s, 60s, the RX 400 series and 500 series. And typically we get low-range video card, low-budget video cards that we put in budget builds, and people are very happy because they're great intro starter PCs, and you're able to get some good bang for the buck. And this CPU has been great to test the hardware to make sure that, number one, it performs well, it is stable and reliable. But we're not used to getting mid-range to high-end graphics cards in the garage, and this one came in, and this is probably going to be the new norm as graphics cards are getting better and things are progressing in the computer world. So let's talk about CPU bottlenecking. So what is CPU bottlenecking? CPU bottlenecking, in a nutshell, is pretty much is that the CPU is not fast enough to transfer the data. It holds back the GPU. So now the GPU has all this power and all this energy to give, and it really wants to push, it wants to give you those good frames per second, but the CPU can't compute all that data and all that information, so it holds back the graphics cards because it cannot keep up with what the graphics card is trying to do. So now this Intel Core i3, it came out in 2017. I think it was January 2017. It's clocked at 3.9 gigahertz, and it's 2 cores and it's 4 threads. This thing has been admirable, and I've been very happy with it, but now it looks like we're gonna have to upgrade it because in 1080p gaming, this graphics card was only able to produce about 43% usage and still had the oomph to go. And when I popped this in a higher end CPU, I was able to get stable frames, it was able to run smoothly, and this thing just kept holding it back. So it looks like we're gonna have to upgrade this. So I'm gonna show some gameplay footage and of the games running at 1080p and all that stuff, and we'll talk about it, and I'll give you my thoughts on CPU bottlenecking and something to consider when you get a new graphics card. So as you saw from the footage, this graphics card had a lot of beans and a lot of juice to keep going, but it was held back. We had a lot of frame drops, and sometimes we had some inconsistencies, and it would just go below 60, and even in Fortnite it would actually drop pretty low. And it was no fault of this graphics card, it's just the fault of the CPU. This i3-7100 just doesn't have enough beans or juice to do it. It is the CPU bottlenecking our graphics card, and yeah, unfortunately we're not getting the full experience of our graphics card. So now, something for you guys to consider: if you feel that your graphics card is holding you back, make sure you have a CPU that's able to keep up with it. I use the MSI Afterburner tool, and it allows you to see the CPU usage and the GPU usage over here. And if you see that your CPU is pegged out at 100%, then it's probably a good chance that is the bottleneck in your system. And in this case, this is our bottleneck. Now, some things you can do to kind of help remedy it is you can lower your graphics settings a little bit, and then at that point you're really not taking full advantage of your graphics cards, and that's actually going to help lighten the load that the CPU needs to keep up with it. So you can lower your graphics settings, but if you pay $300 for this video card, you want to get your $300 worth. And then your next option is that you're going to have to upgrade your CPU. Honestly, for this computer, the best bet would be to go to a i7 7700 or maybe even an i5 7th gen to kind of help it keep up with it. I mean, 2 cores, 2 threads is not enough, and this CPU is actually better for office stuff or light gaming, not just most of these new AAA titles. And if we was to put in an even greater graphics card, you're going to see more of a bottleneck. I wanted to do 2K bench testing with this RX 5600 XT, but my results were actually probably going to be skewed because the CPU is unable to keep up with it. So yeah, CPU bottlenecking, it's something to consider, and it is a real deal actually. And I've seen a lot of people do it. I've had customers come up to me many times saying, hey, I just bought this brand new graphics cards, I put it in there and it's not running like it should. I get a lot of lags and a lot of frame drops. They bring in the computer, we look at it, and I kid you not, I've seen this. I've actually seen people come up into the garage with an RTX 2070 and they're actually running an AMD FX 8350. Talk about bottleneck. So definitely consider that you have a good balance for it. As far as figuring out what the best balance for it is, check the forums. I mean, honestly, if you're going to go with a good graphics card, and this is a 2020 graphics card, you probably want to put a 2020 mainstream CPU or a mid-range CPU for that matter to kind of pair it up. There's a lot of forums that are going to give you information. So when you're upgrading your graphics card, make sure the CPU could keep up with it. If not, I mean, you're really wasting your money and you're holding back on what you can do. Some other things that you can do to consider, make sure, and let's see if we can get over here. Something that you can do to consider to kind of help you is go into your task manager, and where it says CPU usage, see what programs are using the most CPU usage out of it. So like, let's take for example, I just have YouTube running in the background, but if you see Epic Launcher is using 13%, I have this thing called anti-malware service, which is using 6%. A lot of times you're going to have to shut down a lot of your programs. I know a lot of people, they like to leave Discord and other programs running in the background, but if you have a CPU that's bottlenecked as it is, you might want to consider closing most of your applications to kind of help lighten the load of it. So it's definitely something to consider on that. I know antiviruses are big for being big CPU hogs as far as performance and everything like that. And just scroll down and look for the most. Like I said, the one that we see right now that's sticking out is Epic Games, and yeah, Google Chrome surprisingly is only using 2.4% to play a YouTube video. So just something to consider. So CPU bottlenecking, definitely something to consider when you're buying a graphics card. Make sure your CPU can keep up with your graphics cards. If not, like I said, you're wasting your money and you're not going to be able to enjoy the full effect of it. And then eventually you're going to have to get a new CPU. And also, like I said, if your graphic card is not running to full potential, make sure that the CPU is something that could keep up with it. So definitely comment down below. Let me know your thoughts, your experiences, what you think about CPU bottlenecking. Is it something that you're experiencing or that you've run into? And how do you find a good combination for your CPU and graphics cards? As always, if you like the video, definitely hit that like button. Subscribe if you're not. And as always, we'll see what we come up with next.